So, one of the most exciting developments in the field of primate communication has involved young scientists who are trained in linguistics and who've taken their expertise literally into the field to study monkeys and apes in their natural habitat. This has brought new theory, new methods, and new data into research on what primate communication can tell us about the evolution of language. Our speaker today, Mélissa Berthet, has received her PhD in biology at the University of Neuchâtel. She was then a Fissane Fellow and postdoc with Philippe Schlenker at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. And she's held postdoctoral fellowships at the University of Zurich's Institute for the Study of Language Evolution and is now based in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Milan. She's conducted field research on a variety of monkeys and apes in South America and Africa, and the title of her talk, as you can see, is Bonobo Vocal Communication and the Evolution of Compositionality.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. It has been lovely to meet you all, and I'm also looking forward to more discussion this afternoon and tonight. So as Robert said, I have worked with several different primate species, but today I'm going to talk about bonobos. It's basically my postdoc in Zurich that I'm gonna present you the results. Some are not published yet. So if you have actually some input, I'm very happy to discuss them with you. So as Robert said, I study the evolution of human language. And as you know, we don't really have a record of what happened in the last million years, basically. And so what we do in our lab is to investigate how our closest relative communicate and compare that with human language. And from that, we can infer what our last common ancestor probably communicates like, but also what happened since then. So when we look at humans, we have a very complex language. We have meaning, which is the relationship between the signifier and the signified. We also have syntax, which is the capacity to combine units into larger sentences, sequences following rules. And what is interesting in humans is that we can combine the units in an unlimited number of ways, which allow us to convey an unlimited number of messages. When we look at chimpanzees, it has been described that they have 12 call types and that they can combine them in non-random combinations. It has also been shown that they can combine calls, 2 or 3 calls together, and this combination have a specific order. And there was one work by a very dear friend of mine, Maël Leroux, who showed that they can combine an alert call, the alarm who, with a recruitment call, the wabak, and this would indicate the presence of a snake, which would be potentially a compositional structure. And finally, very recently, there was some work published by Cedric Girard-Butos who showed that chimpanzee can combine calls into compositional structures. When we look at bonobos, our second closest relative, it's very less obvious what is going on. We know since very recently that they have 11 call types, and that call combinations can be found in food contexts, also inter-party movements. However, it's not really clear whether bonobos also share linguistic capacities with chimpanzee and humans. Yet they are a very important key in the puzzle, because if chimpanzee and humans share similar communicative capacities, it could just be a coincidence. If the bonobos also share these capacities, then it's very likely that it's inherited from a last common ancestor. So today is what we're going to do. What are the linguistic capacities of bonobos? Just to give you a brief overview, because maybe some of you are not familiar with bonobos. You probably heard of chimps, but bonobos is less sure. They live in large multi-male, multi-female groups. But what is interesting in their society is that it's a fission fusion, just like chimpanzee, which means that at the beginning of the day, the group will split into parties, into subgroups that will reunite again, split again, reunite again, and so on. So they have a very flexible social system where they will associate with different individuals during the day, which is really like humans who go to work in the morning, maybe go to see friends in the afternoon, and will go with their family in the evening. In bonobos, the female disperse from the group, and highest ranks are occupied by females, which is quite interesting compared to chimpanzee. It doesn't mean that the highest rank are necessarily occupied by females. It could be that the leader individual is a male, but those positions can be occupied by females, which is not the case in chimpanzee. Something else that is peculiar in bonobos is that they cooperate with other communities. When chimpanzees are known to be very territorial, very aggressive with outgroup members, bonobos are more tolerant, and sometimes they associate with other communities for several days or even several weeks. And finally, they are known to be very peaceful. You've probably heard of it. If you heard of bonobos, you've heard that they're very peaceful. It's not exactly true. What is true is that they have very few lethal aggression, no infanticide, but actually they have very high levels of aggression, actually to a rate that is very similar to chimpanzee. It's just that in chimpanzee there is a lot of killing going on, but not in bonobos. So today I'm going to present you some first piece of work where we're going to see whether bonobos also combine calls like chimpanzee. Then we're going to investigate what is the meaning of their calls. And finally, whether the combinations are compositional. So to start, I would like to talk about the first project. So the data was collected by two of my research assistants, Lara Zanuto and Morgan Roy, in collaboration with Simon Townsend, Maël Leroux, and Martin Subeck. Martin, who is in Harvard, Maël is in Rennes, and Simon is in Zurich. The data was collected at the Kokoro. You don't see actually the top. That's me. Now it's in the middle. Okay. So this was, the data was collected on wild bonobos at the Kokoropori Bonobo Research Project, which is a field station in the middle of the DRC. It's very remote. It is quite impacted by political instability, and Martin Subeck is doing an amazing job at maintaining this field station and collecting long-term data there for about 15 years now. So what we did is for 5 months, we did focal sampling, so which means we would follow one individual, and for a specific amount of time, 15, 20 minutes, we would record every vocalization this individual is producing, which is not an easy task because it can happen that everybody is vocalizing at the same time. So knowing what your individual in particular did is actually quite challenging. Like I said, they have 11 call types. We use this repertoire. And we considered that when they produce a call combination, it means that calls are separated by less than 2 seconds of silence. And this project was actually a replication of a project conducted with chimpanzee, which really allowed us to compare the data in a very systematic way because we had the same data collection protocol. So the first thing we did is to look at how often they vocalize, whether it's single calls or combination. We looked also at whether the sex had an effect, the species, but also the rank in the community. And what we found is that in both species, males are more vocal than females, but that overall bonobos are more vocal than chimpanzee, and there was no difference in rank. Just so you know, the letters, they indicate significant difference. So if two data points have the same letter, it means that they're not significantly different. So for example, the chimp, the male and the female, they have both the letter A. It means that they're not very different. Then we looked at whether they combine vocalizations more. So we looked at the proportion of combination that were emitted in their overall vocal activity. And what we found is that combinations represent a greater part of the vocal output in bonobos than in chimpanzee. Bonobos combine calls more than chimpanzee. And here there was no sex or rank difference. And finally, we look at the diversity of vocal sequences. And what we find is that in both species, the females will tend to produce more diverse vocal sequences than males. It means that you have more different combinations. But also bonobos, again, they have more diverse vocal sequences than chimpanzee. They produce, actually, you can see the numbers are quite impressive. They really produce a very different number of different sequences. So then we looked at whether those combinations are random or not. That was just a first step, and it's something that has been done in our lab to make sure that it's just not a coincidence that two calls are together, but it's really that they are attracted together to form a combination. So what we did is that we looked at the combinations of two calls, and when they were of more than two calls, which is quite frequent, we would actually split that into combinations of two calls. So an A-B-A sequence would become an A-B and then B-A sequence. And we ran a collocation analysis, which is basically a way to estimate whether two call types are combined together more than you would expect by chance. And it gives this table on the top, on the columns, you have the first call of the combination, and in row, you have the second call. And what is in red is are the combinations that are more associated than you would expect by chance. Roughly, I don't ask you to have a look at all the numbers, but what we see is that in bonobos, we have 23 non-random combinations. And actually, we only had 15 in chimpanzee. So again, when we look at this production of non-random combination, we see that bonobos, they produce way more non-random combination in their vocal activity than chimpanzee, and that there is no sex or rank difference. So all this is a work that is not published yet. We're writing the paper at the moment. But basically, the take-home message of this first section is that bonobos, in general, are more vocal than chimpanzee. And in both species, males are more vocal. Bonobos tend to combine calls more than chimpanzee. They have a more diverse communicative system. They use way more different vocal sequences. And again, in both species, females also have more diverse sequences. And finally, bonobos produce more non-random combination than chimpanzee. The question now that we have is why? Why do we see such a big difference between the two species? There are several hypotheses. The first one is that maybe, so the bonobos, they live in an environment where it's quite dense and food sources are very scattered. So they feed a lot on ground vegetation, herbs basically. And so you don't really need to compete a lot. It's not like a fruit resource where everything is at the same place and you need to compete. So maybe the fact that they can spread like this in very large group needs to more complex vocal communication because they don't have visual contact with each other, while chimpanzee maybe have more visual contact. We also know that chimpanzee produce more multimodal signals, so they use more gestures, facial expressions. Again, that could be because of the density of the environment, but it could also be that the two species just evolve different communication strategies and that bonobos have then a more complex vocal system. Also, we know that bonobos, like I said before, they cooperate with outgroup members. Bonobos are more inclined to cooperation in general. And some say that this could actually lead to more complex communication because you have more opportunities to communicate with someone you don't know. So you need to be more creative and you need more complex cognitive capacities. So We're not really sure what is true or not. Those are just hypotheses, and hopefully at some point in the future we can answer them. Okay, so what we have seen so far is that humans have an unlimited number of combinations and that they're very complex. Chimpanzee, they have about 15 combinations, and the complexity is kind of medium, while the bonobos, they have more combinations that are more complex. So that is interesting, but then what does it mean exactly, right? Because humans combine things together, but it's not just random. It has a meaning, and we create sentences. So actually, when we talk about meaning in humans, we have two types of meaning. You're probably very familiar with this. We have the semantics, which is the stable meaning. Like I said earlier, it's the relationship between the signifier and the signified. But we also have pragmatics, where the meaning changes with the context. You can draw inferences about the meaning based on contextual information. Let's take an example. If I say, I'm hungry, depending on the situation, if I say I'm hungry, it always means the same thing, that my stomach is empty. However, based on the context in which I say this sentence, it can mean different things. If we are in the car and I say I'm hungry, it may mean stop the car. If we are hiking with friends and I say I'm hungry, it may mean let's have a picnic here, and so on and so on. So here we really see the difference between the semantics, what it means all the time, what is the core meaning, and the pragmatic, how you can draw different inferences based on the context. But in animals, it's very complex. Obviously, we cannot ask them what things mean. So what we do most of the time is to observe correlations between what is happening and the signal. So let's take this example. Let's say you have 2 chickens in your garden, and there is maybe a fox nearby, and one of the chickens emits a vocalization. What could it mean? Maybe, that would be, I think, our most intuitive answer, the vocalization means that there is a fox. That would be an external reference. They talk about something that is external to them. And you would know that because this vocalization is always emitted with a very specific external event. But this vocalization could also express the emotional state of the caller. I'm afraid. Here you would see that because this vocalization would always correlate with a specific emotional state in the caller. But it could also mean, it could also inform the other what they have to do. It would be a kind of imperative. Run away, for example, if there is a fox. Here you would see that it means this because when you have this vocalization, there is always a very specific reaction in the audience. And finally, this call could mean, I'm going to run away. It would be a commitment to future actions. And this you would see because it correlates with subsequent actions in the signaler. So traditionally, what people would do is to forecall a group of animals, let's say here cats, for example, and collect occurrences of the signals. But there are some problems in the very traditional approach that was used for decades. Because it was convenient at the time, because we didn't have better method, most of the time we would focus on one signal at a time. That would be one call type, one gesture, one specific facial expression. But that is a problem, actually. If we look at the blue monkeys, they have this vocalization, the piao, that is used in a lot of different contexts. Male agonism, group movement, terrestrial predator. So spontaneously, you could assume that the meaning is something related to an alert. But if you don't look at the other call, that's the idea you would have, but the picture would be incomplete. If you look at other calls of the repertoire, you would see that, for example, they use the quatrain when there is a raptor. So actually that helps you refine the meaning of the first call. You have a competition between the different elements of the vocal repertoire. And that would help you to know that actually alert could also work when there is a raptor. Why are they not using it? It's because the pio does not mean alert, but it means it's an alert, but it's not a raptor, basically. So maybe something more specific. So it's actually important to consider more than one signal at a time. Another problem was that sometimes the signals were collected in very specific context. So for example, only in alarm context, only in feeding context. So here I'm going to take the very classic example of the vervet monkeys of Robert and Cheney. So you probably all know this. So they have shown that the vervet monkeys have 3 different alarm calls that are given in different contexts. One is given to the snakes, one is given to the aerial predator, and one is given to the terrestrial predators. However, in 2015, there was a team who showed that actually, if you look beyond the alarm context, then you realize that those calls are also emitted in social context. So for example, they showed that the aerial alarm call is also used during aggressions, and the snake alarm call is also kind of used in aggression within and between individuals. So here it shows that actually it is also crucial to look beyond specific context if we really want to understand the meaning of the call, because they reassessed the meaning of these calls, and their conclusion is that those calls are actually more related to the emotional state of the callers rather than the type of predator. Another problem is that very often, again, because of limitation of the methodology, people would only code one type of what I call a circumstance. So for example, you remember the chicken example before, they would only code the behavior of the receiver. They would only code the behavior of the caller and so on. But that is actually a problem, because if you only code external event because you think this signal is related to external event, and that actually it is related to the reaction of the receiver, so maybe it's an imperative, you don't know that in advance, and you might miss a part of the picture because your data will not really work, right? You really need to collect to collect the entire context of emission to really know what is going on. And finally, another problem that is very common is that we are humans and we code the data based on our human judgment and preconception. And so we determine what is, we think, relevant to the animal. So we would take only some changes in the behavior of the receiver, only some external events, and so on. So very typically, let's say that you are a researcher investigating rabbit communication, and you follow a rabbit in the forest, and there is a fox nearby, and it starts to rain, and there is food, and there is also a bird, and the rabbit will vocalize. It's very likely that spontaneously people will assume that it's because of the presence of the fox. But actually, we don't know, and it's only by collecting everything and seeing over time what is correlated with the emission of the signal that we can really be sure of what elicited this signal. So it's actually what we try to do in our new approach. We took into account all circumstances of the emission of the signal, which included the behavior of the signaler, the behavior of the recipient, and external events. I said earlier that it would also be great to investigate the emotional state. Unfortunately, that was not possible with wild animals, but it's something we want to do later. And we study the repertoire. We studied all the calls and all their combinations to see how the calls compete with each other and to make sure that we can really investigate when the call is emitted versus when it's another call that is emitted, to really make sure we understand what is the meaning of the call. And what we did to extract the meaning is we considered that the meaning was the largest set of contextual features that were present more than you would expect by chance when the signal is emitted. So what does it mean very concretely? Let's say that I want to study the meaning of this signal. So what I'm going to do is that the first time this vocalization is emitted, I will collect everything that is happening. Maybe my individual seems happy, maybe it is feeding, maybe the recipient will also vocalize, maybe there is a snake at the same time, and so on and so on. And the second time this vocalization is emitted, I will also collect the entire contextual features, and so on, and so on. And so over time, what I will see is that what matters is the presence of food and the fact that my individual is feeding. So that is the first step. What I also do is collect cases where it's another signal that is emitted. And I do the same. This other signal is emitted in this set of context, and this one, and this one, and so on. And here what I see is that actually, in this theoretical example, you see the blue banana. It is here when the signal is emitted, but it's also here when the signal is not emitted, suggesting that actually what matters is not the fact that there is food, it's the fact that my individual is feeding. And it's only with this kind of approach that you can differentiate this kind of very subtle meaning differences. So this looks very good on paper, but we were actually interested in seeing whether that works with real life data. So for this, like I told you earlier, I worked with wild bonobos. And what I did is that for 2 months I did a pilot, and then for 6 months I collected data, ad libitum data. So what it means is that every time, so I was with the group, and every time there was a vocalization, I would collect everything that is happening around this vocalization for 2 minutes. And I would do it with live commenting. I had the microphone that was recording the vocalization, and I would comment over it. And so I had a set of 336 contextual features to describe what is happening around this vocalization. So basically, it means for each vocalization, I would have an entire list of more than 300 questions. And I would say, did this happen when this vocalization was emitted? Yes or no? So for example, I would look at the behavior of the caller, and I would say, was this individual approaching another individual when it vocalized? Yes, no. Was this other individual a female? Yes, no. Was it a male? Yes, no. Was it feeding? Yes, no, and so on and so on. I would also look at everything that this individual starts doing, keeps doing, or stops doing in the 2 minutes after the vocalization was emitted. Again, just answering, did it happen? Yes, no. I would look at external events around the time of emission of the call. Was it rain? Was there aggression? And so on. And I also looked at the reaction of the audience. So just after the vocalization and in the next 2 minutes, what do they start doing? What do they keep doing? What do they stop doing? And finally, I looked for 30 minutes at changes in the party composition, because like I said, bonobos, they have this fusion-fission system. And so it can happen that you have new individuals arriving in the group, or your individual is leaving the party, and so on. So here what is important is it was possible that we had, actually that was the point, that we had several contexts happening at the same time. It's not a mutually exclusive list. And then I used an approach from distributional semantics. This is a branch of linguistics that relies on the semantic hypothesis, which is that words in close meaning are used in very similar contexts. And you can actually plot them in a semantic space where the words are converted into vectors. So for example, here in this semantic space, you can see that bonobo and chimpanzee are quite close in this space. It's because they used along very similar other words. They used in similar context, maybe something like forest, something like animal, something like black, big, furry, and so on. The word car, on the other hand, is quite far from them. It's because it's rarely used along the same words. It's used with fast and shiny and road and so on. So this really allows you to quantify the relationship between the words based on their meaning. And so I adapted it. I ran a multiple correspondence analysis, which is a kind of PCA. And the idea was that instead of looking at the other words that come with the words of interest, I would look at those contextual features I collected. And that allowed me to build a space based on those contexts. And it looks like this. In yellow, you have the single calls. So there are 7 call types. And in blue, you have the combinations. And basically, if two data points are close in space, it means that the context of emission is very similar. So maybe they're feeding, then they travel, or something like this. If they're quite far in this semantic space, it means that the contextual features are really different. They are emitted in different contexts. And so we assume they have a different meaning. But that doesn't tell you the meaning, right? You just have an idea of what is related to what, but you don't know yet what it means. For this, we did simple v-test, which is basically a correlation between a call type and a set of contextual features. And here the meaning of a call type would be, like I said earlier, the set of contextual feature significantly associated with the emission of this call type. So for example, I let you listen to a whistle. So here we have all the contextual features that are associated with this whistle, more than you would expect by chance. So what is interesting is that it also considered, like I showed you before, it makes sure that those contextual features are associated with the whistle and that you don't really find them in with other vocalizations. And so we were super excited. I was thinking, yes, that's finally the way to investigate the meaning. But then I looked at the data and I was a bit confused. For example, with the whistle, it is associated with another individual joining the party 30 minutes after the call. But it's also associated with the caller stopping locomotion after the call. And it's also associated with the caller continuing to travel. And I thought that made no sense, right? There's sometimes stopping, sometimes they continue. And so what we did is to cluster the calls. So that allowed us to see whether some contextual features happen together. And that's actually what we saw. We saw that, for example, for the whistle, we have 4 different clusters, which mean that those contextual features, they happen together. And that allowed us actually to derive what is the meaning of these vocalizations in those very specific contexts. So in some cases, it means something like join, and then someone will join from another party. In some cases, it's something like I am displaying. There is a work from one of Robert's former PhD student, Isaac Schoenberg, who showed that when they displayed, so they drag a branch, it's an invitation to travel. And it's actually something that we observed. There is another context in which the whistle is used to stop traveling, and another context in which it is used to keep traveling. And so here, we actually thought that, so I come from a lab that uses formal linguistics, where it's actually very common for them to use the pragmatic inferences to derive the meaning, the semantic of the utterance. So you remember the I'm hungry example. What we try to do is, okay, sometimes it's a different meaning between all the different contexts, but you try to look at what is the core meaning, what is always happening. And what we see is actually, it is something about staying together. You come, or I invite us to leave, or we have to stop traveling, or we keep traveling. It's always about traveling, right? So this is how, for each call type, we derived a meaning. I want to warn you that here I use human sentences, but it's just to make it easy to understand, right? I'm not claiming that bonobos say, let's stay together. What I'm saying is that when you look at the contextual features that are happening around this vocalization, it seems like it's a call that is made for cohesion. But I'm not saying that they're talking like humans. It's just for illustrative purposes. And so from that, we managed to have, for each call type, a kind of tentative meaning. So some calls were used for short distance communication, some called for longer distance, and so on and so on. And there is one example that I would like to highlight because I really like it. You can see, I don't know if you see my mouse. Yes, here the peep. The peep is an invitation to do something. I would like that we do this. And what was interesting is that when we looked at the contextual features associated with this peep, we see that half of the time, individuals will do the same activity as the caller, but half of the time they would not. However, there was the yelp that was emitted in very similar context, but 100% of the time, other individuals would join the action. And so we concluded that probably the PEEP is something like, I really would like that we do this, but if you don't want, it's fine. While the yelp is a strong imperative, come and we do this, you don't have a choice. So I think that's a kind of, little differences that are quite interesting to highlight. And something else that was really striking is you can see most of those meanings are associated to group coordination. And this I found very exciting because I wonder, with a species that is less cooperative, do you have something like this? Or do you have more calls related to aggression or maybe external event? So that's something I would like to do in other species. So that is for the meaning of the single calls. Now I will move to the last part of my talk about compositionality. So in human, compositionality is the fact that you can have a combination whose meaning is derived from the meaning of its element and the way they are combined. So for example, blue dress is derived from blue and from dress. It is very different from, for example, idiomatic expressions, where raining cats and dogs has nothing to do with real cats and real dogs. And this is this compositionality that allows us to create an unlimited number of messages. So we have a limited set of words, but we can really convey anything we want with those. And in humans, there is also more subtle differences than that. There is the trivial and the non-trivial compositionality. The trivial one is that the meaning of the sequence is an addition of the meaning of its parts. So if I talk about a blonde dancer, it's really the intersection between blonde people and dancers. You really add the two elements. It's a blonde person and it's a dancer. In non-trivial compositionality, it goes beyond a simple addition. For example, a good dancer. It's not a good person who is also a dancer. It doesn't work that way. It's really the fact that good will modify the meaning of dancer. So it's still compositionality, but it's more complex. You have to process it. It's not just a simple addition that you do in your brain. And it was thought for a very long time that trivial compositionality was found in other species, but that non-trivial compositionality was uniquely human. And so we wanted to see whether bonobos had compositionality and whether it was trivial or non-trivial. And so for this, we used step-by-step analysis that was developed just before we started to work on it by a team of linguists. So the idea is you have a set of criteria to determine that a combination is compositional. So for example, the combination of A and B. The first criteria, very obvious, the meaning of A should be different from the meaning of B, just like blonde should have a different meaning from dancer if you combine them together. Then the second criteria is that the meaning of AB should be different from the meaning of A and from the meaning of B, just like blonde dancer is different from blonde and blonde dancer is different from dancer. The third criteria is that the meaning of the combination is derived from the meaning of the element. So blonde dancer is derived from blonde and from dancer. And finally, we wanted to look at whether the combination was non-trivial. And so for that, we had to show that the meaning of the combination was different from the meaning of A plus B. So bad dancer is not a bad dancer. It's not a bad person that is a dancer. It goes beyond this. And so we actually used the semantic space we created to answer those, to check those criteria by using mathematical relationships between the calls and the combinations. So the first thing we did is to calculate a chance value that gives us an idea of the natural variation of the meaning, because just like in humans, it's very likely that there are some calls that have a very specific meaning, always emitted in the same context, and maybe some are a bit more loose and they can be used in more ambiguous contexts. So what we did is, for example, here, let's say we have all the data points of vocalization. We took the barycenter of this data point, that would be the coordinate for this call type. And then we split the data into 2 random groups. And each time we calculated the new barycenter of this group, and we repeated this. And that gave us what we call a chance value, which is basically a mathematical value that tells us how spread the cloud is. And what we know is that basically, if we take this barycenter and this chance value around, anything that is, if there is another barycenter in this radius around, it means that the meaning is very similar. So the first criteria, like I said, was that the meaning of A is different from the meaning of B. So like blonde would be different from denser. So what we did is really to look at the different call types and see whether they overlapped, whether their barycenter were within this little chance value radius. So that's what we did here. Here you have like all the different call types and whether they kind of overlap. And the ones in black, they have a very short distance between them. So it means that their meaning is very close. So when we look at all the combinations that we observe, we can actually remove them. We remove all of those that are composed of this low hoot yelp and peep yelp low hoot, because the meaning of these elements is too close, so the combination cannot be compositional. Then we did exactly the same by looking at whether the distance between the combination was basically whether the combination was far from the different elements. So whether in blonde denser, that would be different from blonde, and blonde denser would be different from denser. And here again, we could see that some combinations actually had a very similar to one of their units. So we removed them from the lists of combinations that were potentially compositional. Then we looked at whether the meaning of the combination was derived from the meaning of the elements, so whether blonde denser is derived from blonde and from denser. So that for this, we had to make sure that the meaning of the combination was close to the meaning of the elements, that it was closer to this element than to any other call type. So basically, in a case like this, we had to make sure that AB was closer to A and B than to C and D. That was a way to make sure that it's really derived from those elements. So here you have all the different combinations, and in pink is the distance to elements that are not part of the combination, and in blue, the distance to elements that are part of the combination. And here, actually, we have a drastic cleaning going on, because we only have 4 combinations that match this criteria. Basically, 4 combinations whose meaning is derived from the meaning of their element. And actually, so those 4 combinations, they fulfill all the criteria for compositionality. Then we looked even beyond. So we looked at whether those combinations were trivial or non-trivial. So as you remember, whether good denser or bad denser was different from bad plus denser. So what we did, because we work in a semantic space, we could create a kind of fake data point. So we actually added the coordinates of A and B to have this fake A plus B meaning and see whether that was correlating with what we observed with our data. And so what we found is that we have 3 combinations that qualify as non-trivial, which means that it's more than just a simple addition of the elements, and 1 combination that qualify as trivial, where it's actually the same as if you just add the meaning of the elements. So just to show you concretely what it is like. The trivial combination was a combination of a yelp and a grunt. The yelp, I told you earlier, it's this very strong imperative, let's do this. And the grunt is something like, look at me, you know, I'm doing something and I want you to pay attention to what I'm doing. It sounds like this. It's going to be very subtle. Wait. It's really something like this. And they actually do it when they build a night nest. And so it can, at first for me, it was a bit puzzling. Why let's do this and look at me. Why is it a night nest thing? And actually, the night nest is one of the most important part of their day. So it's the moment where the entire group has to reunite and build a nest at the same time and make sure that no one around is left alone, because then it's dangerous to be alone in the forest at night. And so I think it's actually a combination of I'm doing something and you have to look at what I'm doing and do exactly the same at the same time. It's the time to build a night nest. That's what we think. For the non-trivial combination, we had this example. So this one is going to be louder, a high hoot and a low hoot. Yeah. So the high hoot is something like, pay attention to me, but in a long distance. You've seen it, it's really loud. And the low hoot could be a call that is related to excitement. Again, we didn't measure the emotional state of the individual, so it's what we think from the data, but it would have to be confirmed. And what is interesting is that it means something like help me. They use it in very sensitive social contexts where they're actually recruiting others to help during aggression. So something like, you have to pay attention to me because I am in a very sensitive situation or something like this. So you have to come and help me. Another combination is the peep whistle. So the peep is very, very subtle. It's something like a peep and then the whistle. I would like that we stay together. And this one, I really like this example because they use it when there is a tense social situation. And they actually use this combination to their opponent. And maybe I think it's something like, I really would like that we stay together. Like, I really would like that we make peace. We have to stay cohesive. And finally, the peep yelp and the high hoot. That's going to be loud. It's a join and pay attention to me, and that would be to travel together. This one, I think, is quite straightforward. You have to come with me, basically. So what we found was super interesting, and actually that was Robert's input when he saw this data for the first time, is that if you really look at this semantic space, what you're going to see, no, sorry, that's not what this slide is about. So what we have seen is that all the different call types appear in those combinations. So we have 7 call types, we have 4 compositional structures, and all the call types appear in at least one of those compositional structures. Just like in humans, all the words can be combined in sentences. And so, like I was saying, what Robert pointed out, which is very interesting, is that when you look closely, the single calls are in the middle of this semantic space. But actually, it's the combination of calls that allow the bonobos to expand their semantic space and communicate about a larger set of things. So it's very interesting because it's very often assumed that animals combine calls to communicate about a larger set of events, but here it's actually very graphic. You can really see it. So in conclusion, in bonobos, there is a lot of combinations going on. The vocal communication really relies on combination. All call types can be combined into 4 compositional structures. And they use this combination to extend their semantic space. So what does it mean exactly when we think about the evolution of human language or evolution of communication in general? Does it mean that bonobos are the GOAT? Does it mean that they're really so special and they have these huge capacities? I don't know. So at the same time we were doing this, there was this paper by Cedric Girabutos who showed that actually chimpanzee, he used a very similar approach. Chimpanzees also have this capacity to use compositionality. But the thing is, those methods have only been applied on bonobos and chimpanzee. So what if you apply it to other species? What would you find? Would you find that actually it's very common in the animal kingdom that we have compositionality? Is compositionality really that unique to human? Maybe we have actually some very basic, primitive forms of compositionality in other species, but at this stage we really don't know because we have never investigated it. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions. Yes.
So there was 23 non-random outside. I was wondering if there was a difference in use of, like if there was
So we did not look at the level of the combinations, but what I can tell you is that in the compositional structures we found, we actually put the sex of the color as a contextual feature and it never appeared. So it seems that at least for those combinations, the identity of the color is not relevant to the meaning. Yes.
Great talk.
Thank you.
So they're in a different category either. But at the beginning of your talk, when you were talking about the difference between bonobos and chimpanzees in their lethality, do you think that bonobo's ability to have such semantic and combinatorial, very precise meaning to their vocalizations contributes to their ability to not go that far in their social life?
Yes. It's very interesting. I think this would have to be tested somehow, maybe with cross-species comparison or cross-population comparison, because it's very hard to know, is it because they communicate that way that they don't kill each other, or is it because they don't kill each other that they communicate that way? Yes, it's tricky. What we know, like I said, is that they cooperate a lot with out-group members. So you really have those groups of bonobos meeting and staying together sometimes for months. And I'm sure this contributes to having a very more elaborated communication system, because you cannot rely on common experience, or, you really have to adapt your communication. Yeah.
Like positive interactions, they're very cohesive. So did you see any like specificity in their aggressively textual, like combinatorial patterns?
So there are a lot of combinations in aggressive context. I don't know exactly if they're mostly in aggressive context or not, but what I can tell you is that in chimpanzee, Maël Leroux actually studied this, and he found that it's mostly the most challenged individuals who will produce combinations. So the females or the low-ranking males, because probably that's a way to really make sure the audience understood what you mean. Yes, so you really have to combine to have a very clear message, very detailed or more complex, just to make sure you will not be aggressed. Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Given the small compositional field, I guess the question I have is, do you think there's evidence you covered or more evidence that this is actually being proposed for sort of an individual bonobo, that they are combining these things versus they could just appear composition, but not be actually treated as such?
Yes.
They could not be representing this as, I'm combining X and Y. They could just be like, so I guess there's a question about learning and representation.
Yes.
At the individual level. I don't know.
So this we really don't know. At the moment, we have only worked with adults, and that's something I really would like to do, actually, see whether one way to see that would be in the infants, for example, or younger bonobos. Do they have trials and error when they combine, or is it just that spontaneously they produce the right combination, and then, yes, it would look compositional on the surface, but it wouldn't be that compositional. I think one of the main thing that is missing in this study, and which obviously we couldn't do, is to study the productivity, because that is one really key thing in compositionality, is that I can tell you something like the pink bat is flying over the rainbow, and you will understand, even though probably you've never heard this sentence before. In bonobos, we don't know whether that's the case, because obviously what we collect is what they say, right? And some could argue that we could do maybe some playbacks at some point, but the problem is all the field sites with bonobos don't want to do experiments. So at this moment, it's that wouldn't have to be with wild bonobos. And so then you enter a new problem. Do they communicate the same way between populations? So you have to redo the same and so on. So interesting question, but we don't know. Yes.
question from online, which is, have you tried to imitate or replicate these calls and see what they do?
So as a human, no, and I would not recommend it ethically because so as biologists, what we try to do is to not interfere with the natural behavior of the animal we're studying. Otherwise, you would have big bias. So we don't feed them, we don't touch them, and we try to really have zero facial expression and no communication with them, because what we want to see is their real, real behavior. So in some places, people do playbacks, so they would not imitate the vocalization, but they would record the vocalization and then broadcast it to the animals to see how they react. But like I said here, it's not possible in this place. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great. I had maybe a question due to ignorance about how semantic space is used in general. So is it the case that for trivial versus non-trivial functionality, you observe that also in human language, that the trivial functionality corresponds to the addition of semantic space versus the non-trivial? So that's my first question. And then I guess related on this topic, did you observe, so it seemed like the non-trivial functionality examples that you had, in some cases had this extra notion of meaning, right? The first one, there was a reason, like the second one was maybe the reason first. Did you look systematically at the, I guess around four? So were you able to identify in the actual meaning what was non-trivial versus
yeah, no. So this, no. At some point, I thought maybe looking at, the distance, like is one element closer to the combination than the other, but I was not really sure that would really work. So it's actually not sure yet. It's really our own human interpretation that says, oh, it's probably, like, for example, there is this... pay attention to me. And I think the I'm excited is the one modifying the pay attention to me, but that is just my interpretation. It's complete speculation. It's not sure. Your first question was the semantic space. So we have actually adapted a method from linguistics. So all those criteria, they come from a paper of linguists studying the meaning of facial expression and gestures in humans. And so they used those steps because they wanted to see when, if I combine a facial expression and a gesture, does this combination has some meaning, or do you just interpret the gesture on one side and the facial expression on one side? And so they also had this trivial and non-trivial thing going on. But they did not exactly use the same semantic space. So at this stage, it's a bit hard to say whether it's, like mathematically, they did not use the semantic space. They were just looking, they also looked at distances, but it was not exactly the same method. So it's, for them, it was human judgment that they were considering. So.
Has it ever been tested for just long answer versus good answer?
I don't think so. So that was something, actually, I contacted a lot of linguists when we were writing this, and they were like, it's maybe, but it's not sure. So it's, yeah. Yes.
You like the idea of applying methods to different species, right? So there's two ways to go. One is to think about some ways that you look at human language to study the combination. I think related to the earlier point. In human, to show human language is compositional, is we have to look for random diagrams, not non-random diagrams. Because we can take anything and combine with anything else. In fact, non-random combinations typically show up in early child language because they haven't learned things up fully. So, but there are methods to show that on a finite sample that experiments. Another way, sort of, maybe this is related to almost human questions, how to use your methods to study human language. So, for example, if this method is sound picking up trivial versus non-trivial combinations, now we have got human data, human language, text data. and the distributional semantic method to distinguish trivial versus non-trivial semantic phrases, for example, prolonged answer versus bad answer. If this method is truly useful, you should be able to identify the difference between human phrases. Well, last time I checked, it's not so, nothing really works, right? But maybe this is.
So yeah, that's the thing. So actually, this trivial and non-trivial, it's also quite a big niche in linguistics. A lot of people actually who study compositionality told me I've never heard of that. So it's so there is very little literature on it, I would say, at the moment. So hopefully at some point we can see whether it works or not. To study human language, actually, we are currently applying this method on babies. Not on humans, because the problem with humans, if I may say, is that we talk a lot about things that are not here. And this method only works for what is happening around. So if you talk about a paper you read yesterday, my method is completely useless. So we think that bonobos, babies, probably it's easier with them to study, like the signals are very likely related to something that is happening around them. So that's something we're doing at the moment to see whether it's similar to other species or not.
It is one of the technologies that linguists probably talk about, intersective adjective, non-executive.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting talk. Two questions that relate to sort of the combinatorics, in particular, one relating that methodology. So one point was that I'm pretty sure I saw one of the early spreads of the dimensions of like meaning distance that the Tame2 call in combined different order, I think was Yelp.
Yes.
Yelp was very far from it, which seems like an important point.
Yes.
Right? If it's the additive meaning combination, I think we can conclude from that at least one of those two is not additive, but that's the method, right? That it should be. I don't know that it means anything about the compositionality based on what Victor said, that it should be, right? So like straight cat's dog. So that was one question. And the other question was that to the extent that we grant that there's sort of non-trivial combination here, I'm actually slightly puzzled by what you said earlier on about what you did about the three-part calls. So like APA, that you split those up, right? Because once you have that level of complexity, like
yes.
in English, you could have bad dancer to have somebody that poorly as a bad person.
Definitely.
So then why do you split that up to A, B, and BA?
Yeah, sorry, no, sorry, you're right. So this was only in the first part of the talk where we look at how often they combine things that we did it. But for this work that I presented with the meaning, we only work with combination of two calls as they are emitted by the bonobos. So combinations of more calls, actually we have a lot of them, but at the moment we haven't studied them because then you have to do the same with 3 calls and 4 calls and then it becomes very complex. So yeah, no, that's a good point actually. Thank you for pointing it because I don't want people to go home and think we just cut sequences randomly. We did not do that. What was your... Yes, exactly. So actually we have several cases like that. So for example, if you see my mouse, we have the high hoot here and high hoot, low hoot. And here we have the low hoot, high hoot. Again, they're quite far in space, so it's very likely that order matters. One of them does not qualify as a compositional structure according to our criteria. So we don't know what is going on. Is it just like random accident, or is it that it means something else? And then what it means, then we don't know. Is it phonological? Is it idiomatic? Is it just, 2 events happening at the same time? So they describe them with 2 calls at the same time. Have no idea. Yes.
Everything we're hearing about is about an analysis of one community.
3 communities, but they're neighbors and they interact a lot. Yeah.
Community differences between the
Yes, so we also included sex and community in the analysis, just to not control but make sure that some features were not too associated with that. And so no signal is associated to one community in particular. But like I said, they're neighbors, and they come. Basically, they disperse not very fast, so they're born in one community, they go to the other. What we would like to do now is to do that in another community that is like 500 kilometers away.
Is there any sense that it would be different to have like people researching other?
So what we think is, what is very likely is that they would have similar call types, because we know that it's very genetically rooted. But actually, nobody really studied whether the meaning changes so that's something I would like to see. Maybe they have the same set of sounds, but it really means something different, or slightly different between communities. That's something I'm very interested in, and hopefully that's going to be my next research. Yes?
I'm curious about when the receivers hear it left together, they need to determine whether they should moving or stop. How does the signaler convey that?
This I don't know. I did not work with videos, so I would say from a gut feeling that they just looked at the color and then they determine what the color is doing, but I don't have the data to confirm that. That's actually something we would like to do next time, is to work with videos and not live commenting, because videos, it's actually, we didn't do videos. Now that we talk about it, I didn't do videos because it's so dense that most of the time I would have had one individual on the frame, which does not bring more than if I'm commenting directly in my microphone. But something we would like to still do in the future.
So I'm understanding your contextual space as all of these contextual binary features you enter.
Mm-hmm.
That if one is not there, it participates, it should be the location, right?
Yes.
But I have a feeling you make a distinction between those and the calls. The calls will be in that space, but the calls do not participate in that space.
Exactly.
And that's, in some ways, sometimes meaning is fed by the thing that was not said. And I'm wondering if you could enrich your space by including the calls that maybe, particularly if they were close, but we're not there.
Huh.
Right there.
Yes, I would have to think about it. Yes, but that's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because we really made sure that we include things that do not happen, because we were thinking maybe they talk about someone missing, or but yeah, it's hard to integrate calls that did not happen. Actually, no, but that's a very good point, because at the beginning of the research, I was thinking I should compare like a kind of a baseline compared to when the call is emitted. But then what is a baseline? That was really hard. And that's why we compare different call types together. But we don't know when there is a silence. We don't know what is going on. Yes.
Thanks very much.